Good morning to our 4 attendees this morning. Thank you for joining us live. Again, we're going to record today so that it can be shared with others who can't make it at this time of day. So we try to be as transparent as possible. I always like to start these things just by reminding people that we have 3 types of what we call parent engagement series that we do here at the school. I'm sure you guys have seen some of these already, the 2030 sessions where we have generally outside professionals, authors, quite a lot of the time who come in, and it's a way for us to discuss the future of education, how we're redefining rigor and trying our best to prepare our students for the world that awaits them. We also have these no-value care sessions. Those are generally done by our in-house professionals, and those address anything from substance abuse, social emotional learning, and things like that. And then, of course, we have these sessions, these divisional Mustang Connect sessions, which, I talk about how there's sort of things where we can talk about logistics, but they're always more than that, as you'll see this morning, as usual. And by the way, if you hear about these divisional Mustang Connect sessions taking place, you don't have to be a parent in that division to attend. You can attend any of the sessions that you would like to. And for the recordings of those that we are able to record, because sometimes especially with the outside people, we don't always get to record them. You can go to the gate and you can find them there, and it'll take you to the school's YouTube channel. So some logistics for this morning as usual. We have an hour set aside. We may go under that, but we will not go over that. The Q&A function, there's a Q&A button there that we like to use. The questions are not anonymous. If somebody asks a question and you like that question, you can click on upvote and that'll move it up. If you prefer to use the chat function, go ahead. That's fine too. The tech is on me this morning, so I'm hopefully going to do well with this, but if anything goes wrong, I apologize in advance. Mark LaRoe was actually telling me how to use tech, and when it's come to that, then you know there's something wrong with me. And on that one. On that note, let me hand it over to you, Mark, so you can introduce our other colleagues and tell us what we're going to go over this morning.
Thank you, Clive, and thank you for all that are joining us. Today we have Dr. Leah Shai, our Associate Principal, and our Curriculum Coordinator, Randy Wilkinson, and we're going to be walking you through some of the shifts we're making as a school to really align us more closely to our deep learning journey this year. So yeah, Leah's going to start us off.
Good morning. So we always like to start with our definition of learning, and today we're going to be referring back to it maybe more than we have in some of our other presentations, because what we're talking about with our growth-centered focus this year really is about enacting our definition of learning. So I'm going to read it here. Learning is a personal, lifelong process that leads to change, including the ability and willingness to adapt. It is driven by curiosity and motivation, occurring in a supportive environment, rich in engagement, social interaction, and feedback. Learning is constructed in authentic contexts and results in the development of new understandings and skills for all learners. So throughout today's presentation, you're going to hear elements of this definition of learning really being highlighted. As an elementary school this year, we really are focusing on 3 things to enact this definition of learning and to really focus on our school's strategic design framework as we support deep learning happening in the elementary school. So in the larger context of cultivating a culture around this type of learning, there are 3 areas, and we're going to talk a little bit about each of those 3. The first one being inquiry. So I want to share with you about inquiry, what inquiry means when we talk about an inquiry stance, an inquiry approach to teaching and learning. And I want to share with you an example from kindergarten. So as you, I'm sure know, kindergarten is the year when you're really starting to learn to read, and knowing the alphabet is a foundational part of that. Now, in a traditional school environment, the alphabet can be taught directly, just direct instruction. Here's the letter A. Everybody make the letter A. Everybody make the sound of A. It makes ah. Now we're going to find the letter A in books. Now we're going to all bring in something from home for show and tell that starts with letter A. And the next week we do B. And the next week we do C. And they're in a very structured way. It is possible for kids to learn the alphabet, to learn the letters, to learn the sounds, to learn to recognize and write them. But in an inquiry approach, where students are really at the center of the learning, it's following their interests and their wonderings, and it's much, much more engaging and authentic. So in this example, you'll see here pictures of some kindergartners who are doing puzzles with the alphabet. And as they're just exploring through natural play, the alphabet, some words that maybe start with those, they might start to realize and recognize some of those connections and have some questions. And so as a class, the kindergarten class, through some exploration, realized like they wanted to know more about the alphabet. These letters look like they're all in order in this puzzle. It's the same in the other one. And so they started thinking about this. What is the alphabet? And then they embarked on a class inquiry. So with some direction from the teacher to be able to help put, young 5-year-olds into groups, they had the question, what do you know about the alphabet, that they wanted to ask other people. So instead of just the teacher deciding, here's what you should know about the alphabet, and I'm going to give it to you in a sequence, they went out in our school community and asked people. So Clive, if you go to the next slide, it shows here's a small group. And so a small group went with one of the teachers around campus, finding adults or even older students and asking them, what do you know about the alphabet? And this picture shows Angie McCullough. She's our admissions director, and she's also a trained speech language pathologist. So she's pulling down her mask to show the students something about how letters are formed and how she's talking about the alphabet with them. So they heard something from her. The teacher who was there just made a little note in order to jot that down. Then they went and they found somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. The groups came back together. They now have note cards. The teacher supported this, but it's really finding out the diverse ideas around campus, like what do you know about the alphabet? And there are a lot of different things that they learned because they were really curious, and they left it open to hear about what other people know. So I'll just read what some of these are. Actually, can you go back to the other one? Yeah, so they sorted them then. They have a whole row there with, you can see the red stickers are keeping together. These are things about vowels, because they learned there's this thing called vowels. Some people talked about there are 5 vowels in the alphabet. Then they also learned some things about how many letters are in the alphabet. There are 26 letters. There's a group of those categorized together. The idea that the alphabet is used to make words, that the letters are combined in ways to make words. They don't just stand alone on their own, that there is an order. It does start in a certain place and it ends in a certain place. On the far right-hand side in the middle with a little green sticker, there's one that says Z really big. In many countries, Z is called Z. That's one of the things that they discovered. So there's a huge range of different things that they're learning. There's also a connection there you can see about Japanese. Japanese doesn't have letters, it has characters. So kids are able to make much broader connections than if they were just learning letters in order, letters and sounds. From all of this, they then realized we have more questions, because we heard these things about vowels. What are vowels? So now, if you'll go to the next one, Clive, thanks. They went and they repeated the same activity. Now with the question of what do you know about vowels, small groups went out and asked. Maybe they ran into the same people or tried to ask the same people, or maybe it was different people this time. They got different bits of information. So they learned about the vowels. Here they are. Every word has one. They connect the consonants together. Y can sometimes be a vowel. So they're learning much, much more about the alphabet. And if you were to look at all of the things that they're learning here, the amount is much broader than if it was kind of a very structured, direct instruction style of learning. By following the kids' interests, the inquiry approach allows them to ask questions, to find out answers, to kind of sort out the answers, to make new questions, and then to seek out new learning. It really puts the student at the center of the learning, and it's much more engaging. I'll tell a story, if you don't mind. I have a kindergartner at home, and my daughter knows most of the letters of the alphabet. She kind of knew most of them coming in. But this inquiry was so engaging to her for at least a week. Every night at dinner, it was, I want to tell you something. Let me tell you about the alphabet. What do you know about the alphabet? And inevitably, somebody in our family would say something, and my daughter would say, I already knew that. What's something else you know? And she wanted to, kind of get more and more and more. One night she sat down, and the background knowledge that you need to know is that my husband is from New Zealand. And one night she sat down and she said, do you know, I mentioned a classmate, she's from France. And in France, they call the letter Z, Zed. And my 5th grade son said, Ellie, Dad's from New Zealand. They call it Zed in New Zealand. And then with her excitement, she turns to my husband and said, Dad, did you know in your country they call the letter Z Zed? as if my husband would not have known for his whole life that that letter was called Z. But in this little 5-year-old mind of hers, she was so excited because she wasn't a passive learner in her class. She wasn't just sitting getting information. She was interested. She was curious. She had the opportunity for her curiosity to be sparked, to go out to find answers, to make new questions, and so excited about this learning that she couldn't even imagine that, you know, it's blowing her mind. How, of course, it's going to blow Dad's mind too, that this letter Z is actually called Z. And so this kind of engagement is a huge part of our definition of learning. And this inquiry approach to teaching and learning is a way to put students at the center of that and to really help them be engaged. Clive, if we go to the next slide, it shows a ton of things that kids can learn through this. These are all standards from the English Language Arts section of the Common Core State Standards, which we use to help guide instruction. But if you look at all of these are all things that are key foundational parts of reading that kindergartners need to know to, as they grow and as readers, to be successful readers. All of these things could be taught in very explicit, direct ways. And probably many of us, or if not most of us on this call, learned in a pretty explicit way. So you can learn to read with somebody just teaching you the letters bit by bit. But in this inquiry approach, where kids are at the middle, they're super engaged and enthusiastic, and they have ownership of their learning. And so it's much, much more empowering, because not only now does my daughter know letters, but she also knows ways that she can find out more things. She knows ways that she can ask questions, find out answers, be curious, sort information that she's learning. And those things go well beyond just simply reading. The next slide helps see, rather than just having all these academic standards, but the parts of inquiry that really come to our definition of learning. So I pulled out from that this inquiry approach. It really highlights learning that's driven by curiosity and motivation. The kindergartners were doing that. It's supportive and in a supportive environment, rich in engagement, social interaction, and feedback. They were out in their school community, talking to lots of different people, getting that information. It's an authentic context. It's their questions. It's not just rote memorization. They're talking to real people about how they use the alphabet and what they know. And it results in the development of new understanding and skills for all learners. So they're not just learning, that looks like a letter K, that makes the sound K, but they're understanding it has a role in the alphabet, in words, and it's a much broader context. So it's really developing their understanding. So one of the 3 major things in the elementary school that we're doing this year to help us focus on deep learning is using this inquiry approach more and more in our learning.
The next area of focus is authentic learning experiences for our kids. And authentic learning experiences really means what's happening around us that we can learn more about. And in elementary school, we've really taken a deep dive within the authentic learning experiences, especially with partnerships. So we have partnerships that are taking place across the school from kindergarten all the way up. Example, in first grade, they partnered with an AP bio classroom. They're working with them on understanding of scientific processes, and they're working once a month with the high school students. And it's a really big partnership between the 2 grade levels. Both groups are learning. The high school students are learning how to persevere and grit through sharing their experiences with our first graders, and our first graders are learning about scientific processes by working with these high school students. Our 4th grade and kindergarten have paired up with a community children's cafe. It's a NGO that's local, that is helping to feed children in the neighborhood that aren't getting the amount of food that they need each and every day. 4th grade has taken that on as part of their poverty unit, and also kindergarten has taken it as part of their sweet potato cultural experience that they do every year, which they provided them with a huge pile of sweet potatoes and greens for them to eat to help provide food for the children. We can go on to the next slide, Clive, on number 12. So another area of authentic learning, it's the RICE project. And I know we've talked quite a bit about the RICE project over the last several years, but it's an evolution of learning and engagement for our students, and authentic learning that's taking place. So in the years past, the students planted the rice, learned about the systems of the rice, cultivated the rice, and really made it as a cultural experience. They're learning about the culture of rice and how it incorporates that within the Japanese culture, and seeing the whole process connecting to each other. But over time, the students are saying, well, we want to raise more rice. We want to grow more rice. So what are the systems that are involved in raising or growing rice that we could change or modify so that we could produce more rice. And so they've done a number of different experiments, and you can go through, just click right through here, from looking at the amount of water, looking at pesticides, looking at, we put medaka fish into the rice paddy to keep the mosquitoes away. And so now the students were thinking, well, what if we put goldfish in the rice paddy? Will it increase the amount of rice that's grown? And so they've been doing these experiments. Now, at this point, they've accumulated a great deal of data, and they're taking their data and they're analyzing it. And what their next step is they're going to give me the charge in telling me what they want to try for next year's rice production. What changes are we going to make within, whether it's adding different types of fish, adding more fertilizer, amount of water that we have the rice growing in. But they've come up with a way in which they've collected the data. They are analyzing the data, and they're going to give me one wish for next year to try for our fourth graders to plant the rice in a different model. And hopefully that model will produce more rice. But that's an example of authentic learning that's gone through a process of iteration and practice and trial and error, and it's going to continue to grow and change over the course of the next few years.
Yeah, another element I'd say too of how all these cross over is that authentic learning is the way we learn, that we all learn out of school. We learned a certain way in school, and then we all kind of do inquiry all the time to learn while we're out of school, and that's what we're trying to replicate. And in that challenge is, how do we teach both the content standards and develop students' portrait of a learner competencies? And that's where this image of a double helix comes in, that we're working with teachers on to help not only add rigor to the content standards, but add connections to the real world, add this feeling of hope and change making within our students. In the next video, you can go to the next. Oh, this is a larger image of the double helix, and you can see how our academic standards, the discrete skills we're learning, are woven in with what we want kids to learn about in global citizenship and mindset and creativity and critical thinking. So then in the next slide, pause here. Oh, go back.
Oh, pause? You want me to go back?
Yeah, go back. Yeah, go back. Sorry, I don't think we told you that they're automatic. So I just want to start the video. Sorry.
There?
Nope.
That
Show us the student. Yeah, Mia.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm just going to set up the video. Thank you, Clive. All right, so in here, as you watch Mia talk about the learning with the RICE project as a context of learning all these things about portrait of a learner competencies. So not only learning about systems and critically thinking about where are the connections and what are the patterns that I'm seeing in order to make informed choices. What is her mindset when she's thinking about next year's kids who are going to be working in the rice paddy, or even new students that are learning about the culture of Japan through rice. So notice as she's talking about those things, she's also learning a great deal about science and systems and ecosystems and the way things are connected. But her learning has gone way beyond, just the list of science learning that maybe how you and I learned science. So notice as you watch that.
Today we did dakkoku, which is to take out the rice from the stalk. Before we did that, we did harvesting, and then we dried it out in the sunlight for 2 weeks because it's healthier than putting pesticides on the rice. With the pesticides, there's lots of added chemicals, and that can be harmful for animals around here and also harmful for our bodies if there's too many pesticides. Instead of pesticides, we used fish in the pond because it would eat the mosquito eggs, so then the mosquito eggs wouldn't go around the school. And also we use the fertilizer from the husks that we took out with the dakkoku to put it down as fertilizer again for the next year's 4th graders. when we did dakoku, instead of like using mechanical machines, we used like that wooden machine back there that we pedaled it with our feet, and then it would like fling the rice off of the stalks. For me, I enjoy coming out here because it gives you more of an idea about like people who actually do this as their job, and like you can see the process more clearly and what it would actually look like in a rice field. I do have a couple classmates that have just come here, and I don't know if this is what they see this as. Maybe this will help them understand where they live and like what our culture is, so then maybe they can study it more, or if they just want to like learn more about our culture, so then they can just understand more. And like when they go to the supermarket, they'll be like, oh, that's where like rice came from.
I hope you also noticed in there that the inquiry approach that was in this learning really inspired those kids to learn much more than maybe the teachers even set out. And we really are hoping the kids are learning to notice learning opportunities everywhere around them, and everything they see inspires a question for them to head towards and try and figure out and try and connect it to the things they already know. Specifically, the grade 5 teachers were looking and talking with their kids about building specifically the global citizenship portrait of a learner competencies, understanding and appreciating the importance of the environment for human life and survival, care about environmental issues, generating sustainable solutions, interested and comfortable working in real life challenges, and then comfortable with tasks that don't have a set of solutions. We have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, even if it's silence. Clive. Next.
Oh, does that
There's a couple more. Yeah, these fly in. Sorry, they're very fancy slides. Also, thinking about their critical thinking skills, which is a process of learning. It's like a process and a product of this learning. So students are learning how to test and evaluate their solutions, and then they're reflecting on their work to inform further tests and further solutions. And you saw some of that data that that Mark had talked about. And then on the, again, this is a double helix. So on the science side of the standards, they were definitely learning how to plan and conduct an investigation. So really doing the work of scientists as they produce data, learn from it, reflect on it, and then iterate in their next designs of their investigations. They're also developing models that describe the systems that they see taking place in that, that environment of the rice paddy. And then they are making claims that that is what's happening, and then they're supporting it with evidence from what they've been observing or the data that's coming out of their investigations. So all that learning kind of inspired by that ecosystem outside that we can dig our hands in and really begin to understand outside of a textbook.
So when we put these three things together, the three main things that we are focusing on in the elementary school, this inquiry approach, authentic learning contexts, and weaving the portrait of a learner competencies and our academic standards together, where all those things cross in the middle is this student-centered approach to learning, and it's growth-focused. It's not limited by outcomes that we preset, and it's not just about getting to some end goal. It's really about a constant process, ongoing of growth, where the student is at the middle. So when we have PAC days like we did yesterday, or professional development days, a lot of what we're doing is thinking about in these three different areas, how can we revise the learning experiences that students are doing in order to enhance these things more. So at the middle here is the student-centered, growth-focused emphasis that we're trying to do in everything this year in ES. On the next slide, it shows, we'll get there. One of the things that students are doing now, we're going to start to move this presentation into how does this reflect on the processes that we communicate back to parents in our conferences. So students are using the Portrait of a Learner competencies, and they're written in ways that we can unpack a little bit, understand more, how might a student grow over time, and in different contexts, what kinds of characteristics might they show. And so here on this slide, it shows at the bottom some things that might show a student in their self-direction. If a student is a self-directed learner, in the ways that they're growing, you can see how it sort of shifts as you move across that those boxes about what it looks like. So in the picture, students are reflecting on this. They're working together. They've learned about and talked about what does it mean to be a self-directed learner. In a small group, they're thinking about the statements in there. They're considering themselves. And what am I like? Am I like this? Do I do this? Am I able to identify what I know or what I need to know? Am I really good at finding out the answers? Maybe I'm not doing that yet. I can identify what I need to know, but I'm not yet sure how to get the answers. Or maybe they're saying like, yeah, I love choosing a topic, but I don't know what to do with it next. So they're reflecting on themselves. And then from that reflection, they're going to think about what's an area they really want to grow in, and they want to focus their growth on this year. So they can be quite intentional about looking for opportunities to grow in those areas and stretch themselves. The next thing that we're going to share is another little video of a student talking. And this is a student who was in the ES last year and now is in the middle school and was invited to come back to talk to some of our fifth graders about what that process was like for her and how she grew over the time when she did focus on one of these Portrait of a Learner areas. And the area she's going to talk about is feedback, because even more important than getting specific feedback on, let's say you write something and you get some feedback and then you improve that piece, understanding the role of feedback as a learner is something that will go far beyond that specific timeline. So this is kind of like a success story. This is what we're headed for. This is what we're looking for all students. But in this year, we're at the beginning of this. So this tells you kind of the end goal for a year. How might a student reflect on it? So Clive, if you'll go ahead and show the video, we'll listen to the student instead of me.
Hello, my name is Jasmine, and last year I was in Mr. Rowe's class. My Portrait of a Learner goal then was to improve and accept feedback graciously. Now, that may seem easy, but for me it was very hard, because when you accept feedback graciously, you are understanding and acknowledging the fact that you are not perfect or you have not reached your goal yet, which for me felt like they were telling me I was wrong. So I had to change my mindset. And part of changing my mindset was reaching out for feedback, because no one wants to be critiqued if they didn't ask for it. So when I reached out for feedback, I really felt like I was growing and improving as a person. For the most part, I did that really well, but there's always a balance you have to keep. You can't have feedback every single second of your life, but you can't have absolutely no feedback. You need that balance. Sometimes I would overdo it because I wrote crazy long stories, and I would ask for feedback daily from my friends and from my family and from my teachers, and it was way too much. So I had to change again and try it a new way. By the end of the year, I was able to reach my goal, and I was able to accept feedback graciously. But the main part of that was I kept trying and I didn't give up.
So this process that Jasmine described, how she grew over the year, we want to be able to capture that in some ways and share with you. So Mark's going to share about what that'll look like for the conferences coming up this month.
So all of this work that we've been doing in the three big, what we're calling rocks, lead really to the next conversation, which is how do we capture this? How do we really capture the learning that's taking place over the course of the year? In a traditional model, we take a test at the end of the unit. And there'd be a yes, no, they either get it or they don't. Percentile in the past was used, A, B, C, D was used in the past to identify a student's knowledge of a concept or skill or a standard. But with our competencies, it's a little bit different because each competency is in a progression of change. So over time, we're looking for certain characteristics that show that a child is understanding and is able to demonstrate a behavior within the competencies themselves. So this year we're starting off with our conference forms. And our conference forms are really just a way in which we capture the evidence of growth. Our forms have always been a strength-based growth kind of design form, but it's really going to be integrating the evidence of learning throughout the year. So we've shifted from last year or years past where mindset was the competency that we focused on as an elementary school. We've moved up into all of the 6 competencies that we've adopted as our Portrait of a Learner. And so you'll see that on the first page. You can go to the next slide, Clive. So within that, as Leah said, it's about strengths. What does your child bring to the school, bring to life that are their strengths that they can use to achieve wonderful things? And so the teachers and students are working through a process in which they're identifying what are those strengths that they bring to everyday learning in life. Within that, then they're looking at, where do I need to grow within the competencies? Would it be mindset where I need to show perseverance and grit? Do I need to have more open belief in learning in life? Do I need to be a better collaborator, communicator, critical thinker? So that's the work that teachers are doing with your students at this week and next week. They're trying to identify what are those areas, and then what are the skills within the competencies, or what are the skills, the standards, the skills within the standards that support those competencies for the growth. And so on the conference forum, you'll see the area of growth that will be in a competency base. It will be aligned to our portrait of a learner. And then you'll see these standards or these skills that are needed to support those areas of competencies. And then the idea of how do you capture that evidence, right? Because again, it isn't about a test. It's about things that are happening throughout the year. Students will be reflecting every other week, every 2 weeks, on their competency growth areas. And so they're going to be, whether they're finding their evidence in Seesaw, whether they're doing it in a slide deck, whether they have a drawn out example of their growth, they'll be sharing it and it'll be linked to the document. In years past, what happens in November, the students set their goals, and then right around March, we start talking about those goals again and say, how'd you do this year? What reflection do you have you made? And so we know that through proper feedback and reflection, students are going to grow much faster. And so we're shifting this year so that every 2 weeks, there'll be additional information that is shared with parents and for the student to reflect on their growth. You heard Jasmine talk about her need to reflect. She talked about herself and how she identified the need to take feedback. And she pointed out some areas of where she probably really needed to shift in her thinking and be more open to feedback. Same thing's going to happen with your children. That was a perfect example of identifying their strengths and then identifying those areas that they need to grow. Big question comes up. So what does it look like on a report card? So there really isn't for this next year going to be major shifts in the report card. The report card will pretty much look the same as it always has. Yet the comments where the teacher narrates what has changed with their child over the course of the year, that area should shift into more alignment to the growth within the competencies. So you should see more language about communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and so on, mindset within those comments to align to those growth areas that you're going to find on those conference forms. Those conference forms are considered a live document, meaning those forms will every 2 weeks will have some way to update. Some teachers are putting folders from Seesaw where the students are going to do their work within Seesaw, and that link will be in the document itself. Other grade levels are using slide decks that they're doing weekly or daily reflection on growth, and that also will be linked on the form so that you have access to it all. Each grade level will share how that's going to be done for your child, so you should understand where that information is coming.
Another question that this might raise is why is the school changing? Are the other divisions changing? Is this just something that's different for ES? And to the answer to the first part, are the other divisions changing too? Yes. If you have been able to attend any of the Mustang Connections for other divisions, you will have heard similar messages that might play out contextually differently, but the same thing is happening in terms of the shift towards deep learning and how we're embracing the portrait of the learner competencies and using those to really drive students' learning and student growth over time. And why is the school changing in this way? Well, we had one of our ASIJ 2030 sessions, I think it's the beginning of October, I don't remember the exact date, I'm sorry. sorry. And Dr. Alka Hansen shared with us. She's the author of the book, The Future of Smart. And listening to her, if you've not yet had the chance, we don't have the whole video here because it's over an hour, but we want to encourage you to find the video either on our ASIJ YouTube channel, or I believe it's in the Gate as well. It's been sent out in past Mustang bulletins. It's a really, really fabulous presentation that she did to talk about why education is changing, why it needs to, that our future is different, that the education system that's based on an older way, when we didn't have the kind of technology that we do now, when the world was different, it's not a system that's going to prepare kids for the actual future that they're going to be going out to. So our ASIJ 2030 session, 2030, our fifth graders now are in that class of 2030. And when they graduate, the world will be dramatically different than it is even now. And so our system has to change to be able to keep up with that so that our kids are really ready for the future. I really strongly encourage you to watch this sometime if you haven't yet. Her presentation is great, and she makes an amazing case for why it's so important for us to be making these changes. I know the high school has presented about their deep learning seminars. It's one of the major changes that they're doing in order to be able to support this kind of learning, where it's de-emphasizing some of the other traditional ways of doing schooling and measuring success, and making sure that students are having really, really rich, authentic experiences where they're able to follow their own areas of inquiry and activate those portrait of a learner competencies to work on projects. And that's something that's going to be rolling out in the next few years in the high school. And that changes for all of us how we're preparing our students for their future.
So we now would like to open up to questions. Hopefully that has sparked some curiosity and some questions from all of you. And if not, I'm sure Clive will come up with one, because he normally does, which is always wonderful.
Yeah, so while people are thinking of those questions, I do, because I always do. But in the Q&A function, if you want to go ahead and type something in there, if you don't mind, I just listening to this, want to go back to the report card. So we have our portrait of a learner competencies, the 6 that are in there. And then I believe within there are progressions, for each of those about where we view the kids. Is there still a letter grade associated with any of these? Is there going to be a letter grade on the report card?
That's a really good question. When we talk about the progressions and the competencies, in the language that we're looking through a child's journey of learning, there's no way to assign like this child is achieving or is getting an A, or it's a process where in one situation a child may demonstrate collaboration extremely well, and another one in a different situation they get challenges that aren't supporting the same progression or the movement through the progression. Or within creativity or critical thinking, you'll see them like in one area they're really strong, in another area it isn't. So it isn't a yes no like in the traditional form where you get a 95 on a test and that's an A and you're, yes, I did really well, right? It's all about, and that's where the evidence, what evidence do we collect over the course of the year, or does the child collect over the course of the year, to show that they're growing within those progressions, to demonstrate that they are actually becoming a better collaborator or a communicator. And that's what we're looking for. So that's where the conference form and the evidence collection, whether it's in Seesaw or on a slide deck, that's going to be so important to show that growth over time. The report card is still the traditional beginning, approaching, achieving for the standards themselves. And then the competencies, it's really going to be in the narrative where teachers explain, the growth area in the work that the child has kind of taken on through that competency. So yeah, there is no ABC. That's been long gone even before I got here. So a long time ago. And so that's the big shift.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking that, you guys know that I came from the International School of Prague, and I remember about 5 years ago, and this was in middle school. We did a trial. I don't actually know where that is at this point, but the trial was to have no grades, that the teachers were assessing the kids based on these sorts of things and writing them. And we had to get the buy-in from not only the students, but the parents. And so there was an agreement that here in middle school in this grade, we were going to do this. And what was interesting for me at that time wasn't so much the kids, but what was interesting about the kids is they knew what they were being assessed on, where they were lacking, but it was because the teachers, the feedback from the teachers is how much more they had to know the kids on certain levels of these things in order to be able to provide the kind of feedback that kids needed in order to improve with stuff. You mentioned, Mark, you take a test, you get a 95 and it's yay. And then it's like, throw it aside, move on to the next thing. And getting away from that bit where, as a parent, you could have all of this stuff written down, but you're actually looking for where's the score. And if it simply says 95 or an A, don't even bother reading this stuff. You just move on to the next thing. I guess they're doing okay. And what you want is for everybody to be reading that deeply and understanding where the child is with those things. So.
Yeah, if you think of Jasmine in her video, that if we could have every child to be able to look at themselves as a learner and reflect on that and demonstrate growth over time and how that growth has really affected them as a future learner. You see where we're going with this. By the time you start in nursery and you go all the way to 12th grade, what kind of person are we creating that's ready for the world around them? Like, it's so exciting to see. Like, you listen to the kindergartners talk about grit and perseverance, or we never give up, or not yet. They use the word not yet, right? And so you see that and you say, that's so energizing, because you think in the future where they're going to be and how they're going to use those skills to hopefully better the world and make a change. So it's exciting. It's really exciting work that we're doing. And I hope parents are seeing this at home and the conversations kids are bringing back from the school experience. So hopefully you have some questions. These series are set aside for parents to ask the questions that they want to hear answers from the principals. And so that the conversations don't happen downtown where there isn't an answer being given that's correct, right? And often lots of questions arise when there's social functions and people say, yeah, I wish I knew. These are the opportunities to ask. Well, we can handle any question that gets raised, and we'll try to find the answers for you if we don't know them. So if you don't have an answer or a question for this session, please consider, posting some questions when we ask each month, and we'll try to answer them the best we can.
And please also let people know if you hear people wondering about something, that they can attend these sessions too. And we also record them and we'll put them up there. We know people do, not everybody can attend this time of the day, so they can do that. And I would also, remind everybody that you don't have to wait until these sessions. All of us are accessible to answer questions at any time. So.
Yeah, just one more thing. I did not just forget to shave. Every month in November, every year, November, we call it Movember, and it's Men's Health Awareness Month. And it's just a way in which I try to remind people to look out for themselves and take good care, both men and women. But it's a way in which I try to promote that. And so eventually by the end of the month, I might have a white mustache kicking around here. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I told Mark that by the end of the month he looks like Will Ferrell in Anchorman, but he's also cheating because you're supposed to grow the mustache and shave everything else. You can't just look scruffy until your mustache grows in and then shave.
All right, by next Monday I will shave. By this coming Monday I'll shave. How's that, Clay?
Okay.
All right.
I'm not doing it, by the way.
Oh, I have a question. Great.
Oh, a question. Are students doing these reflections in their special courses as well as main classroom?
Lee, you want to hop on that one?
Sure. Yes, they are. And so this is something that we talked a lot about actually this year with our specials teachers and Japanese teachers, that if a student is identifying an area of growth within the portrait of learner competencies, they're primarily doing that work in their homeroom, just because that's their home base where they're spending the majority of their time. But whatever their area of growth is, it's not limited to the homeroom academic learning. It applies to their time in specials, it applies to their time in Japanese, it applies to their lives outside of school. So if we take that example of Jasmine, and she says she's looking for feedback, and that's what she's trying to shift her mindset around feedback. If that's the area that she sets aside as an area for growth, then that's going to carry over. When she goes to art, she's going to be seeking out feedback on her art process and getting input from whether teacher or classmates or others to change or to reflect on, to revise her process and learning through that. Same in PE, she's going to be getting feedback about how she's doing jump rope or how she's swimming and using that as a process to learn. She'll take that goal into Japanese to get feedback on her pronunciation or how she's doing writing or her presentations, whatever it is, so that those portrait of a learner competency goals really go across any area. It's not just going to be limited. They won't be doing every other week and every specials in terms of that reflection. As Mark mentioned, every other week, there'll be something added to that form so parents can see growth over time. You don't have to wait all the way until April. So the specialists won't be in every subject area doing that every other week just because of the number of times that they're there and that kind of thing. But you will be able to see if the student's able to find and identify evidence of growth in that context, then yes, that will be part of the process for them as well.
Thanks, Heather. Marley, I'm not sure how to understand the question, but I'm sure these guys do. Can you give some advice on how to deal with inquiry that is constructive? Do you understand the question, you guys? Or interpret it how you want, but Mark, you need to remove your mute again.
Twice. That's twice, and I'm sorry about that.
It is.
So I think this how I'm going to explain it. So inquiry, it's about questioning, and it's about developing your ability to ask the right question. And then not only to ask the right question, but then the skills to look for answers and to find that constructive understanding of what's going on around you. And so it's a process that students have. We're also teaching the back end of how to find the answers. How do you look for answers that are the right answers? How do you ask the right question that will add value and change over time? And so that's the kind of the process that we look through and the lens that we work with. But anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just say real practically, I don't know, Marley, how old your kid or our kids are, but it can be exhausting, but it's really important to honor your kids' questions. Of the 5-year-old at home, they're constant. And sometimes I, as a parent, have to kind of pause and think like, right now, what's more important is not that I get the kid to bed really quickly or that I even just give her the answer, but that I encourage her to continue to be curious about her world and ask questions, right? So yes, there's a time and place when it is bedtime and it's 10 minutes past time and she's still asking questions for me to say, okay, I'm turning out the lights. Let's talk about that tomorrow. But in general, when she has questions, my approach is to almost always my response is, that's a really good question. And then move on with it, like honoring the curiosity that the child has. Or if she comes to me with something like, did you know in New Zealand they're called letter ZZ? And it's like, yeah, of course I knew that. Like I've known that for a very long time. I don't need to let on to that. Instead, trying to like encourage that excitement that she has and be like, yeah, that's really interesting. Where did you learn that? What else are you learning? And trying to kind of engage her in the excitement of her curiosity. I think as a parent, like I said, it can be exhausting sometimes, but just focusing not on the answers to the question at the time, but focusing on like developing this little human into a questioner, into a kid who's excited to ask questions about their world and excited to try to find answers and super curious and engaged and trying to honor the question. So like I said, I almost always respond with like, that's a good question. Let's find that out. Where could we find that answer? How do you think we might be able to look into that? It was very, very difficult the other night. We were looking at the lunar eclipse because there were some questions she asked that I had no idea. Luckily at that point, my 5th grader was like, well, we can Google that. So we looked up, why does it look kind of red when it's happening, right? But now together, the family is thinking, we saw this thing in our world. This is authentic. We had a question. Let's figure out the answer. Let's talk about it. So just looking for ways to nurture that kind of sort of culture of being curious and being interested in the world.
I would add too, as much as you can, model your own curiosity and rethinking about things that maybe your kids assume you know and have a fixed mindset about. And then as they get older, you will notice that they then have these open conversations with you because they know you're willing to rethink it and look at it from a different perspective. I just think how important that is for like the skill of media literacy. And we're all taking in all these messages, whether we're on the train or watching a cartoon and a commercial, whether we see an ad, and to always having those questions in your mind, like, what is that making me think? Ooh, what are they trying to get me to think? What are they trying to sell me on? Whose power is this lifting, and who is this taking power from? Imagine if we had a world of thinkers like that didn't just accept that, these singular truths, these one perspective truth, and we, really started questioning what's at the root, that's what we're really trying to build, from these little guys all the way up to adults like us.
That's what I appreciate about my colleagues who tell me that I have a fixed mindset and I need to practice inquiry.
We appreciate your openness to think again.
Yep. I was, doing my Japanese classes, speaking of continuing to learn, and I just, the greatest thing I've learned now is doshite desu ka? Why is that? Why is that? So even if I don't understand what people are saying, I can just keep asking the same question over and over again. So, okay. I think we've learned how to get people to ask questions now, is to have inane questions about Mark's unshaven face. So we could continue talking about that, but I think we're probably good for now. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Again, please, if you hear people wondering questions about the elementary school or any of the other divisions, you can remind them that we do have these Mustang Connect sessions that they can either attend live and ask their own questions, or they can watch them in recordings at later times. And thank you guys again for joining us live today, and we will see you next time. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye.